If you want to acquire businesses because they're cheap and you think you can just pick up something on the fly and press in the box, you should be a private equity fund. When you're a growing venture-backed business, you're doing acquisitions to get bigger faster, to get some innovation that you couldn't build in the amount of time that's
the acquisition to fast track your roadmap.
Exactly. And I'd say everything we bought that was like, well, this will be a great financial decision, turned out to be a horrible financial decision. Anything we bought where we thought we were getting a great deal, or it was taking us into a market we weren't in, but we didn't know what we were doing in that market, that was not good, right? But when we were like, oh, these guys don't know what we knew how to do was sell and how to take products to market within the Salesforce ecosystem. And so buying a company that fit into that model, that had great technology, and then put it into what we're doing, took the business from 0 to like 15 million in less than 12 months.
Welcome. This is Second Acts, a podcast where we document how SaaS leaders chart the challenging, chaotic, ultimately foundational second acts of scaling up organizations. And I'm your host, Krish Subramanian, co-founder and CEO at ChargeBee. This episode's guest, Ted Elliott, started out as a general counsel in the pharmaceutical industry. In late 1999, he took on the CEO role for a bootstrapped recruitment software business called Jobscience that his sister had founded. This was a time of disappearing Aeron chairs, he says, or as we have all come to know it, the dot-com crash. So their first pivot was for survival. The second, he notes, was around finding a business model. The third was an against-the-grain move to build and scale on top of the then new yet unproven Salesforce ecosystem. That last bit did prove out, leading to a great exit in 2018. Within a few months of that exit, Ted joined Copado as their CEO and has since channeled his masterful understanding of Salesforce to scale a multi-product DevOps platform that has raised upwards of $300 million. During our conversation, Ted talks about why he thinks Salesforce is largely misunderstood as a cloud platform, the common sense premise of the kind of M&A deals that simply don't work for high-growth companies, how he hires for speed of trust, a personal battle that has changed his perspective on life, and a whole lot more. Dive right in. And if you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And if you really like the conversation, drop us a review. I would really appreciate it. Thank you. Welcome, Ted. Excited to have you in Second Acts.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. So to get started, can you please tell us what Copado does?
What does Copado do? Well, I like to say that we do less divorces, or we make it so you can go home and have dinner instead of being at the office all night trying to get the Salesforce system working the way you want it to. I know you guys at ChargeBee do a lot of integrations with Salesforce. So imagine people pushing changes and having ChargeBee and Salesforce no longer talk to each other, how much business risk that can present. People purchase Copado to set up a system so that nothing ever breaks. And when it does break, you can quickly recover. I think our business has evolved over the last couple of years really to a different business than just keeping you from having to miss dinner into, okay, what are all the things to do right? How do you become more efficient? How do you have what we call DevOps nirvana, which is moving through the stages of improvement, really true agile development. How do you do that for low coders with complex business apps? And I think most recently, we've really dug into AI. Had an initiative for the last 2 years called AI First, where we tried to figure out every possible thing we could do in the business with AI by figuring out all the things you can't do with AI. And it's had some pretty dramatic results for us. So it's an evolving business, but I'd say we're really around the development experience, how to make sure that people like their jobs and how can they constantly do better. And I think that's a real engineering culture.
Brilliant. Thank you. And this is your, before Copado, right? You were building Jobscience for 18 years.
Yeah.
And
Jobscience was 3 pivots. And then before Jobscience, I helped start a pharmaceutical company. So it was really interesting. One time I had a call with someone, they're like, well, you've never raised $250 million before. And I'm like, well, actually, I did. It was just for a drug that failed, so I don't talk about it a lot. But I've been in the pharmaceutical industry, recruitment software, mainly. The third pivot was Salesforce. That was the one that worked. Sold that company to an insight portfolio company. And then I was an investor, met the founders of Copado, and got more and more involved in the business and ultimately joined the business. I've been here for 6 years.
Fantastic. And for Jobscience, how did you arrive at the decision to pivot, especially?
Well, in 1999, 2000, I don't know how old you are, but it was an interesting time where I called it the running of the Aeron chairs, where everyone in San Francisco had raised all this money and then the rug got pulled out. And so you saw all the fancy Aeron chairs getting loaded into Ryder trucks to be taken to eBay for sale. And at that point, you really had to figure out, what are we doing? How are we doing it? Is this going to work? And the first pivot was really the survival pivot. The second pivot was the how do we build a business? The third pivot was how do we build a business that can scale? And so luckily, the first two businesses could bootstrap us into the third business. When we happened to get into the Salesforce ecosystem at a time when most investors were not willing to be first movers. And so a lot of times when you're bootstrapping, you really have to be a first mover. When you're not bootstrapping, you really need to have you ever heard the term blitzscaling?
Yep.
Yeah, you really, when you have the capital, you need to blitzscale because it's your competitive advantage, the ability to just go for it. When it's your money and you don't have a lot of choices, and if you screw it up, you've messed up a lot of people's lives through your brothers, sisters, moms, dads, whatever. You just have a different problem set you have to solve against. So they actually feed each other in terms of experience, but they're very different types of problems.
Right. And this was early days of Salesforce itself, right? Way back in 2010.
Yeah, I started working with Salesforce in like 2005. And I really started being a partner in 2007. And then we sold the business in 2018. My sister started Jobscience in 1999 while I was doing the pharmaceutical company with my dad. And we decided to pivot during sort of what I would call the internet bubble into the internet. We're fully vested in our life science company we had started, and it was what we thought was the better move at the time. And sometimes what seems like a great decision, once you get into it, you start missing tumors. And that's the joke on pharmaceuticals. But, the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, it takes 20 or 30 years to see something come to fruition. Right. In my own case, I actually got cancer. And the real benefit of starting the pharmaceutical company was being able to call the people I'd worked with 15 and 20 years ago and say, hey, remember we were working on this indication for colon cancer, live colon cancer. So who should I go see? So it's really funny how, you really want to never burn bridges and have the ability to call people that you work with, and you never know where that may lead in the future.
Right. And I think last time we met, you spoke about how that changed your perspective and all that. So we can leave that conversation for later.
Sure. We'll hold on to that one. But I think what happens is every door that slams on your face or opens creates a whole new set of choices, right? And you either, my dad never really carried his past experiences forward into his next mission. And I always felt like he had all this great experience that he wasn't bringing with him. I didn't realize he was bringing it with him, just not the same way I would bring it with me. And so I feel like every one of these experiences builds you some experience for the next decision.
Very true. Very true. I think recently I was reading somewhere that every one of our reactions or how we process pretty much anything, the same information, everybody processes through the sum of their experiences.
Yeah. Well, I think what happens is that when you think you're dying, you realize we're living in the Matrix and it's all a big game. And you said you're in Amsterdam. That's where I first saw the Matrix, actually. It's a story I'm not going to tell on video. But you just start to be like, what's important to me? What matters to me? And you tie all your experiences together in that to sort of figure out what drives you, right? And the luxury in life is being able to decide what you want to do with your time, right? And most people won't realize that until it doesn't matter to them. And so that's a real big deal. And I think for entrepreneurs especially, it's like your time is your most valuable asset. I thought at points when I was at Jobscience, I'm like, wow, I have spent a lot of time here. I wonder if I wasted my life. And I didn't realize what I was doing was building up a bank of experiences that I would be able to apply to my next mission and make me make decisions faster, act faster, know how to do things. So it was a great learning experience. one which I do not seek again, but great at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, you asked me a question, right? You don't know how old I am, right? So I'm 44,
Okay.
just turned 44, and I keep saying this.
So you're a young pup.
Sorry?
You're a young guy.
Well, I keep talking about this idea that the first 10 years of the career is actually just figuring out, learning, picking up skills, and with what you do. And luckily for me, I was able to start up like with that 10 year of experience to actually build this, and first company. I'm still working on it, and it feels like it's still the beginning of the journey. And one of the things I was talking about with my co-founder was, if we get to do this for another 1,000 weeks, that is, we are talking about 20 more years of actually building this. And yet the moment we put it in weeks, it actually feels like there is so much to do in 1,000 weeks and not.
But you wake up every morning excited about what you're doing.
Yes.
So that's the key, is like, it's not 1,000 weeks. 1,000 weeks will go back and it'll go by like that, right? It's, am I excited about what I'm doing? Am I passionate about what I'm doing when I wake up in the morning? And guess what? Every day is not going to be that way, right? But if 5 out of 6 days or 4 out of 5 days are like that, you can power through the days where it's a little harder. And honestly, what a luxury to love what you're doing.
True. And one on a related note, one more thing we talk about is, how do we design the best day, best week for every type of job in the company, right? For a developer, what does a best day look like? For a salesperson, what does a best day, best week look like? At the beginning of a month or a quarter, it could be very different, which could be sourcing deals, like having the right opportunities to be able to close for the quarter and staying excited to say, I'm going to be able to exceed my targets. Versus the end of the quarter, that particular week, a great week could actually look very different. So ability to visualize it, and also making sure that even simple things like, because you talk about the developers and also your mission being like people being able to go back home happy, is that also the job of a manager as well as the support needed from other teams, not to raid people's calendars and destroy productivity, which is giving that focus time that is needed for creators. The creator job, the Paul Graham talks about the maker, the manager versus the creator schedule. And how do we ensure that for creators, how do we carve out the time that is needed for them to actually have a satisfactory day?
One of the things I've learned is that the best thing to do sometimes is get out the way and let people go figure it out for themselves. And how do you create hierarchies of leadership where you know that you don't need to have your hand in every person's business? You can, and this is really the difference between the startup stage, where I've been doing a lot of reading actually about sort of the Elon Musk style versus the sort of the corporate scaling style. And I have to say I'm probably much more the guy who will go sleep on the factory floor and let everyone know we're not going home until this is working. But there's a balancing act, right? Because ultimately you can't scale unless you have people you trust, and they have to have a clear sense of mission and purpose and process. And do you have the right people on the bus? And as the companies get larger, you're really down to people, process, and products. And you as a leader can't do all that much to drive the day-to-day. You can only drive sort of the vision. And then do you have people understanding the vision? And you find yourself repeating yourself a lot, which is doesn't get you up in the morning excited, because, part of being startup mode is new ideas. Oh, we could do this or we can do that. And so it's a really interesting journey, right? And you start to realize like, hey, either I adopt and change myself to go with the journey, or I need to find people who are right for the next step of the journey and figure out when I am done with my piece of the experience. And I'm a little older than you, so I think I'm at the stage where I've decided that I want to evolve, because I don't have many more years to evolve and learn. But if you had asked me 10 or 15 years ago, I was into I need to have my hand up everyone's, and know exactly what's going on and help them understand how to do their job. And now I've kind of come around to, well, I really don't have the time to figure out how to fix everybody. All I can do is lay out the vision and enforce it. And that's a very different experience than being the actor. I'm sure you've experienced this.
We are going through some of that. It's actually fascinating that you mentioned it, because when we started, we saved up over 10 years to say at some point we want to start, and it was to learn to build an organization. So today we talk about it as the job of a founder is to get the chairs out of the way, like what the line that stuck from Joel Spolsky's blog in early 2000s was an inspiration, right? So getting chairs out of the way to build an organization is what we try to focus on. So we think about it as org design, how to have the right people, give them the charter and get out of the way and enable them to succeed. Gives a lot of joy, because that's what makes the organization scale. So, and then of course there is enough for us to actually continuously obsess about the product. And the more we speak with customers, there are those new ideas. The caveat is, the thing that we need to be careful about, I think you mentioned it, is not to go run to the team with new ideas every day, right? Holding back.
I try and fill up my schedule with stuff that will make it so that I cannot talk to everyone all the time, because I find I'm like radiation. A little of me, you'll be warm. A lot of me, you'll be dead. And so how do I just give people the right dosage so that I don't overwhelm them with my greatest thought of the moment? And it's really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah. That's the part that I'm learning the hardest. Awesome. Coming back to the Salesforce part of the journey, you had mentioned that Copado fundamentally sees Salesforce. I think Copado fundamentally sees Salesforce as a misunderstood company. For such a big software company that's doing so much, Salesforce is not usually interpreted as a big platform cloud player. If you talk to most people in the DevOps world, they'd be like, who would work on Salesforce? I believe that this quote was long back. And can you unpack what you mean?
Yeah, so it's
Salesforce is misunderstood.
Yeah, I do think it's misunderstood. And I think that you have this challenge today, which is Gartner looks at DevOps and thinks about full stack development and all the things that you need for full stack development. But if you really think about where the enterprise dollars are going and where the CIO wants to invest, they want to invest in business applications that low code or replaceable, pieces can maintain. So what a CIO really hates is some custom piece of code in the stack that some developer built, that if that developer leaves, no one knows how to touch it. So you've seen a migration over the last 15 years to more and more applications being built on Salesforce, ServiceNow, on whatever your platform of choice is. But I'd say those are the two biggest. SAP and Oracle really haven't figured out how to come across the river on this. And Microsoft is full stack developers that are using C# or GitHub, or they're kind of in that one. So you have this missing layer, which is, okay, we need to apply agile business processes to developing of our low code business apps. Just because you can build something and you don't need to be a full stack developer doesn't mean that you should throw all the processes out the window. And so when you think about an agile development cycle, or who's going to go back to waterfall? No one, right? So if you're going to do agile development, you can't just be like, oh, you're building on Salesforce, I guess we can throw that out the window. Now, one of the challenges you have when you go into this environment is that people who have traditional DevOps backgrounds are used to maintaining Kubernetes and the stack and GCP and all the pieces of the pie. They don't know what to do because their skills are really set. They're still infrastructuralists, right? They're in the infrastructure and process. And when you come over into low code biz apps, you're really dealing with more of a consultancy approach to how you release applications. What's been missing in that low code approach is really process, right? So, hey, how do we plan? How do we build? How do we test? How do we release? How do we operate? Those 5 pillars of a low code development platform and application lifecycle management process, they exist just as much in apps like Salesforce, ServiceNow, as they do in full stack development. In fact, you can probably do your work 10 times faster. You can get projects built 10 times faster, but you have the constant struggle within the enterprise of made here versus not made here. And what we found is that companies that are, billion-dollar companies do not want to have a made here attitude because they realize people come and go and they're in the scaling mode and they have to keep things up and working. Whereas you work with a startup who wants to made here, we did it ourselves. There's this, we want to hold on to everything. And I think as they mature, they start to realize, hey, we probably should use a set of applications that keep our house in order, because it's much more important that the systems work and that we have stability and that people can rely on us than we are innovating the pixel in, line 332 to perfection. Does that make sense in terms of the hidden monster that's in there? I mean, if you think about the amount of money being spent just to develop Salesforce applications, if you said, okay, let's count that in all the development that's being done within enterprise computing, right? Within enterprise software delivery, it's a massive component of it. It's right. Much bigger than people realize, but no one's really quantifying it because no one thinks about the parking lot application. Or I don't know, I'll give you a crazy story. We work with Fox Entertainment. Do you know that Fox Entertainment uses Field Service Lightning, a tool built for sending people out to fix your refrigerator? They use Field Service Lightning to manage all the news reporters to report all the sports stories about all the sports coverage that Fox does. And they're dispatching the stories to all the freelance journalists using the same application that a GE or a Whirlpool would be using to dispatch them to come fix your washing machine. Okay. Well, if that application goes down, they're done. Right. So they have to treat it like a full DevOps process, and they need to have heavy testing, and they need to have all the practices you'd have, or their business just doesn't work. And
the reliability that is needed for that is actually very, very high compared to the other use case.
Well, these tend to be public companies. They tend to be companies operating at massive scales. Mercedes, Volkswagen, Entergy. These are Kaiser Permanente. These are really big entities. And so people are like, oh, well, that's not real development. No, that's what keeps the fish frying and the people getting healthcare and your insurance covering and all the things that we have to get done in society in order to function. Is it as sexy as building Facebook from the ground up? No, it's not. But once Facebook got big, they needed Salesforce. And what did they need after that? They needed a DevOps process. And that DevOps process isn't going to attract the same people who build a full stack as the people who are maintaining the IT infrastructure of the business. So did I answer your question and give a little better color to it?
This is very helpful because this is a unique insight of understanding of an ecosystem and the impact on the businesses that you're actually connecting the dots that makes you very compelling for enterprise buyers.
Yeah, because they don't have anyone who is a rotorhead who wants to spend any time with them. I mean, I think the number one way we picked up customers is that they were told, we'll go hook up Salesforce to the Git repository. And turns there's no one on the Salesforce team that understands anything about Git or Jira or how to configure it or how to make it work. And all of a sudden you have this gap between the technical side of the business and the execution side of the business. And you need a middleware in essence to come in and solve that problem, because the folks on one side want nothing to do with the folks on this side, and the folks on this side think they're going to replace the people on this side eventually. In fact, they usually do. And so there's this really big controversy or stress in the business.
Yeah. Beautiful. That's a brilliant insight. That is almost every company has a horror story of a failed Salesforce implementation, and then followed by, okay, this is how we figured out. Right.
It's like democracy. I say there's 3 stages to Salesforce. I don't know if I should be saying this in case someone from Salesforce is listening, but the first stage is, what is Mark Benioff talking about? And it would be as if God was speaking to me directly. You hear Mark talk about AI, you hear talk about agents, whatever it is. It's like, oh my God, he sees what I see. It's what I think. I wonder how he came up with this. And then the next phase is what I call the valley of death, which is now I'm trying to take what he was talking about and actually do it. And no one gave me any instructions, and they gave me sort of breadcrumbs of how to do this, but I'm knee deep in garbage and I'm dying, right? And you get through that, and once you get through it and you're on the other side of it, the first question you ask is, what is Mark Benioff talking about now, right? And I think a lot of what Copado is actually about is getting you through the valley of death in a matter of hours, as opposed to a matter of years. Because after a matter of years, you're just like, I don't care what he's talking about. I don't want to hear this anymore. I think what we're seeing is that ServiceNow, other stacks are coming up, and they're starting to figure out this ability to free up the end user to be creative. And in fact, AI is really doing this, Krish. At the end of the day, AI is moving when creativity happens to the left. Okay. The moment I have the idea, I can actually talk to a machine to validate the idea. I can actually start building things. We're going to see this acceleration of the people that Copado services, because they're going to be able to do so much more than they were ever able to do before. And that's going to be, I think I've actually called it the Copado pivot, AI is this pivot, and investors like Insight don't like to have you go to a board meeting and say, hey, I can't explain it to you exactly, but this is a pivot moment. And it's like, well, wait, but you just build this business that has over $100 million in revenue and you quote unquote want to pivot. That scares us because we've already calculated what the business is worth and we don't want you to blow that up. So you then have to go, okay, well, what are my investors really telling me? How do I need to adjust my game so I don't put their investment at risk, but I also don't miss this massive business opportunity if I'm pivoted in the right way to take advantage of it? So you stop using words like pivot. And you start saying, well, we're listening to you, and here's how we're going to build on where we've started from, and here's how it's going to help us grow. But you really do have to be conscious of the investor, because at scales of over $100 million in revenue, it's not the same as, hey, we took a swing, put $7 to $10 million in you, and if we lose it, that's just the cost of the game. They've already banked on the return they're going to get from the investment. So you really have to think differently about how you manage your board and how you also work with them and listen to them. Because if you're not listening to them, everyone loses.
Yeah. It's a very good one. On a related topic, right, you have, can you tell us about your acquisitions and new lines of products? And also how are they connected to this particular insight to take advantage of that insight?
Yeah. So we built a product about 4 years ago for value stream mapping. And we thought, oh, isn't this going to be great? Everyone wants to understand where they're getting value from their development process, where they're wasting money, where things aren't working, et cetera. And of course, all the developers were like, you're just trying to put the magnifying glass on us so you can punish us. And remember, we had started off with how we were going to help them and make them more successful. And now we're going to put a speculum inside them and tell them exactly how they're feeling. And they weren't all that excited by it, right? We started looking at the data we were getting internally, because I had this big belief that if we can't use it internally, we shouldn't be selling it to anyone. Like we have to, I think I call it eating our own dog food. One of our founders calls it drinking our own champagne. And I think drinking our own champagne is a much nicer way to put it, right? So we started using our own value stream mapping app. And what it told us was that quality assurance and testing was a big hole. And if you looked at the development cycle, underinvesting in testing and underinvesting in figuring out when things were breaking was what was costing the entire development cycle massive amounts of time and cost. Because not applying quality at the front end, you were paying 3 to 4x more for it on the back end, right?
Yeah.
There was also customer problems, all types of things, right? So I said, hey, if our DevOps process is telling us that testing is important, we should probably go buy some testing companies, because the amount of effort and time it would take for us to figure out how to do testing is going to be massive. So we bought 2 testing companies. One was focused on robotics, like a UiPath or an automation anywhere, but for testing. And the other one was focused on SAP. And honestly, we fell in love with the robotics testing, and we think it has a lot of applications. It turned out to be the best acquisition we made to date, mainly because we weren't just acquiring robotics or testing, but we picked up AI and ML from a team that had been working for 10 years to create autonomous testing. We started saying, wait, hold on. Could we repurpose the autonomous testing to be autonomous code writing, autonomous planning, autonomous operations? Like, what else could we do with this beyond testing? And the analogy I like to use is the US government in the 1960s used drones in the desert to shoot missiles at, so they could see without hurting a human, what would happen if we shoot this missile. And that's testing. That's the equivalent of testing, right? But they started figuring out, wait, why don't we just strap some missiles onto a plane and control it with remote control, and then we don't have to hurt any pilots because we don't have to put the pilots in the plane. Well, that's kind of what we're doing with AI, is we're basically taking all the learnings from testing and now applying them to what I call the offensive. And it made it a great acquisition. Now, there are acquisitions we've had that have been disasters. Okay. What caused the disaster acquisitions? Lack of alignment, lack of having the same interest, lack of wanting to be here for the long game to make it happen. You really cannot acquire, if you want to acquire businesses because they're cheap and you think you can just pick up something on the fly and press in the box, you should be a private equity firm. When you're a growing venture-backed business, you're doing acquisitions to get bigger faster, to get some innovation that you couldn't build in the amount of time it's going to take.
The acquisition to fast track your roadmap.
Exactly. And I'd say everything we bought that was like, well, this would be a great financial decision, turned out to be a horrible financial decision. Anything we bought where we thought we were getting a great deal, or it was taking us into a market we weren't in, but we didn't know what we were doing in that market, that was not good. right? But when we were like, oh, these guys don't know how, what we knew how to do was sell and how to take products to market within the Salesforce ecosystem. And so buying a company that fit into that model, that had great technology, and then put it into what we're doing, took the business from 0 to like 15 million in less than 12 months, right? You're the type of returns you're looking for. Now, that's hard. Those are really hard deals to find, right? You have to do a lot of work beforehand. We missed a deal. There was a deal that we should have bought where I applied my set of rules to acquisitions like, hey, are these guys on board? Well, it turned out it was a company that the founders were more interested in starting a veterinarian dog food company than they were in code scanning for security. And I was like, I just don't think we should buy someone's company where the founders want to go do dog food instead of build security products, because that tells me they don't believe in their product or they don't see the future. I was wrong. I didn't spend enough time understanding them, and we should have bought that company. And I think if we bought that company, we would have been able to do the same thing we did with the testing business. So sometimes you lose one. But you know who Charlie Munger is? He died recently.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, I just had a conversation with our team where I was like, listen, we're only going to buy companies that we would want to pay a premium for, where they're great companies and we can do something with this great company. Because if we think we're going and hunting for turds that we can shine up, that's not the business we're in. I'm like, if you guys want to go start that business, go at it. I'm not sure I'm going to be joining you, but that's it's just a different business model. There's a great company called Trilogy, which has taken a bunch of products that are never going anywhere and strap them together, and they've created $3 billion a year software companies. There is a place for this, right? But it's not in a highly innovative, how do we get you to go home for dinner, mission driven, purpose built play.
Yeah. It's more of financial engineering, revenue roll up kind of companies, right?
Yeah. Which, by the way, I was 10 years younger, and I'm really good at some things that you shouldn't be good at, like reorganizing and reshaping. And I probably have a lot of negative Glassdoor reviews about my ability to fire people. And I get calls from time to time by private equity firms. They're like, hey, do you want to come work with us? You seem to have these really good traits. And I'm like, you should never be good at something you don't want to do, right? I remember hearing a quote about war, which is, it's good that war is so horrible or we want to do it all the time. Like, just because you can do something doesn't mean that's what you should do. You need to really feel like you're hitting your own personal mission.
Yeah, it's 100%. By the way, Charlie Munger, one of the quotes that actually when you were talking about looking forward to every day, one of the phrases that we talk about is tap dancing to work. That is Charlie Munger's quote. How do you tap dance?
Those guys are all happy.
90s.
Yeah, the fact those guys want to work, they don't need to work. They want to work. They love doing it. It keeps you going. My dad used to say to me that as long as you're learning, you're growing. And honestly, I think about it all the time. Like, am I learning? Am I growing? And with this AI stuff, like, I'm learning new stuff that I couldn't even imagine learning on a daily basis.
Totally. 100%. Coming back to the topic, acquisitions, right? And then subsequently, one of the harder parts of the things to figure out post-acquisition is monetization, right? And how has your understanding of the Salesforce ecosystem helped you in evolving the monetization of these acquired products?
I think that what I've learned is that Salesforce is a distribution company like Pfizer or Merck. They're no longer an origination company. They're no longer originating new research. And therefore, what you need to figure out is where are the swim lanes over at Salesforce where you're complementing them or doing something that they're just not institutionally set up to be successful. And how do you find those swim lanes and always remember that they are the big shark and you're the little remora on the back of the shark, right? The little fish that swims on the back of the shark. And so long as you don't try and, every time you think you're a big fish and you swim out in front of the shark, doesn't work out very good. As long as you go, okay, how can I draft off these guys to get to where I want to go? And you may end up becoming a big fish. I think everyone's goal is not to be the remora.
Right.
Okay. But you need to plan it out carefully and always be complimentary and always realize they have their mission. I think this is a general principle, not
just a good analogy, right? And a good mental model to actually think about
know who you're swimming with, what they like to eat, and stay away from their mouth. And that goes for investors, that goes for Salesforce, that goes for everything. It's like, know what they're trying to achieve. Not like we always think about what we're trying to achieve and what we want, but it's really important to know what everyone else in the room is trying to achieve. So you can be honest. You're like, hey, this is what you're trying to achieve. This is what I'm trying to achieve. Here's where we're aligned. Here's out of line. Let's be honest about it. And when you're honest, no one can be mad at you for being honest about what you're trying to achieve. They may not want to achieve what you want to achieve. You know, Salesforce, what I usually find is there's a lot of people who want to achieve things, but they don't have the ability in such a big entity to make those things happen. And I don't know if you ever watched Seinfeld. There's this great Kramer is at the office working on these reports, and the guy comes in and says, these reports are horrible. It's almost like you don't work here. And I like to think of myself a lot of times like the Kramer of Salesforce. I don't even work here, so I can walk out the door anytime I want. The rest of you are stuck here. If I'm going to be here, how can I work on the reports I want to work on, right? And that's just an art of knowing what they want and what you want, and then saying, okay, how do I put things in distribution? We'll complement them. And listen, I came back to this. I did not need to come back and work more. I like it. I like what I was able to achieve with Salesforce. I like building things. And so what I wanted to do is figure out how do you leverage that so that you can do it again and again and again, because that's where you can start learning new things, because you don't have to go back and repeat the stuff that doesn't make sense anymore.
Brilliant. I love the mental model and how you're actually thinking about it. Amazing. Great learnings there. Thank you. Switching topics.
Sure.
I'm going to go back to one more quote that you had mentioned long back, which is for context. The quote is something like, what I ended up doing was I ended up hiring about 40 to 50 people that I knew pretty well. I had known some for over a decade. I had worked with them in the past. That gave us the speed of trust pretty quickly, right? And love the idea of speed of trust, right? And so what sort of org design systems have helped you scale as you have scaled the team and have thus given way past your internal networks?
I think the first thing before speed of trust is suspending fear. Because I think as founders, or I'm not a founder in this company, I'm a paid gun, right? But as a startup guy, what our number one enemy is in life is fear. What if I make this decision and I work out? What if I spend this money and it goes away? What if I'm wrong? What if they find out I'm full, whatever, and I don't know what I'm doing? What's going to happen to me next, right? Once you suspend fear and you start saying, what do I absolutely positively need to get done? The first thing you need is people around you that you know what to expect from them, right? Trust isn't always, well, I'm going to hire 40 great people who do everything perfectly. It's I'm going to hire 40 people that I can at least know what I'm going to get. And by the way, sometimes you're going to get surprised that one of those people you trusted is going to fall out of the circle of trust. They're going to do something that disappoints you. And the hardest part is recovering from when you are disappointed. And there are going to be times you disappoint them. Because part of the reason they came to work with you is they're like, oh, this is a safe thing. Ted's got my back, or he wouldn't want me to be here again. And it's like, no, it's a new game, and I'm bringing you into the new game because I believe in you, but you got to prove yourself again and again and again. And it's interesting. You can take people who are in two different businesses, and they can be 10 times more productive in one business than the other. And it's not necessarily who they are. It's who they are in the market they're in at the right time, in the right place, with the right skills. And what did they learn from that other experience? And all of a sudden you can get a completely different result. And you might be able to take them in another company that's got the wrong conditions, and it doesn't matter what you do, they're not going to be able to pull it off. I mean, one thing I did before I joined Copado is I was interviewed for a number of CEO jobs, right? And my favorite thing was to go to these interviews and tell them no. Nope, thanks. Really interesting. Not interested. And the driver of that was, did I think the conditions existed for that business to be successful? Because most businesses where they want to bring you in, when you've been CEO of a company, there's something wrong. There's something wrong. And they want you to go fix it. And of course, they don't want to pay you very much to fix it. And they want to tell you how it's the greatest opportunity ever and how you're going to love it. And then you have to carry all the weight of it. And so you have to be really choosy about what you do. And for me, a little problem. Okay. You have to be choosy about what you do and what you say yes to, right? And also it makes you feel really empowered to go to Sequoia and be interviewed and then tell the guys at Sequoia, no, I think I'm going to pass. Thanks, but I'm going to pass. I love Sequoia, don't get me wrong, right? But that power to be able to say, I get to decide what I'm going to do with my day, which sometimes when we're in startup mode and we've been working the same job over and over again, and we're like, what would life be like if I wasn't here? What would my next 1,000 weeks be like if I wasn't here? Oh my God, my life would be up. Like we fall in love with the reality.
The grass is always greener, right? And you wish you could make a new set of mistakes and wipe that clean slate clean and make something completely new. Right?
Exactly. And so you've got to be in this position of, I in control of my own time. I get to decide what I'm going to do, right? Because by the way, we're in control of nothing in life. So if there's only one thing you think you have control over, it's your time. One of the things that you do learn when you're dying is that you're not even in control of that, right? So I'd say that's the first thing. And then you've got to get people around you, at least 10 or 20 that you are like, hey, this is my team. And these guys will deliver. And if you can't find 10 or 20 people to follow you into the fire who've been in fires with you before, you should step back and say, is that a fire? Like even before I joined Copado, I brought people over to come in and do due diligence on Copado and say, what do these guys have? Is this interesting? Do you think this would work? Do you think this would work in our network? What do you think we could do with it? Right. And when you get that confirmation from your trusted network, and then you're like, okay, let's go in there with the trusted network and make things happen. Then you need to be in this sort of blitz scale. We're like, we are going to make decisions quickly. What I told the founders when I first came in is I was like, listen, I know you guys like developing code, but people are buying it. So we don't need to build a lot more of it right now. We just need to make sure it's super stable and we can sell more of it. And if we sell a lot of it, it will be easy for us to raise more capital because people love to invest in growth. They don't love to invest in a new science project, right? And luckily the founders of Copado were willing to play that game, right? And so it worked. And so those are the type of things that you just have to, figure out, is that going to work for you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a brilliant way to assess before accepting the position to say, okay, now why am I going to be excited? And there is also the whole idea of how would I reimagine this? Because like every company is flawed in its own ways, right? That's not the issue here, right? It's about being able to imagine a future to say, here is where we are going to go. And then through your lens of assessment, are you able to imagine that possibility? And will you have that space to be able to go do that, right?
Yeah, it took completely. And are you in love with the mission? So I sat down with these two guys for dinner and I'm like, give me the pitch. And they're like, okay, we have this client who could never do a release because everything was breaking. And they thought it was going to take months to fix. And we came in 3 days. They were releasing every 6 hours. And I was like, oh, tell me more. Because I had lived through really bad releases that had gone horribly, right? I was the guy at the elevator bank that would make sure the developers weren't leaving the building until it was working because I knew we were dead if that happened, right? I'm sure you've experienced this. There's got to be one night when charging or whatever, something happened.
Never do deployments on Friday evenings.
Yeah. Yeah. Where you had to be there all night and you knew when you woke up in the morning, you were going to get pinated and you were just like, oh my God, I hate my life. I hate being here. This is a disaster. How do I not have this happen anymore? And I was like, if we can solve that for some people, that's a first step in me feeling like I'm doing something with my life that is, no one may understand it except for me, but boy, it sure feels good.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So in hindsight, what were, if you may summarize into 2 or 3 most important decisions you made in the first year as Copado's CEO that have allowed you to scale the way you have been able to unlock growth? What are some of those decisions?
Spend the money as quickly as possible. Yeah. Spend the capital you have as quickly as possible. I remember having a call with someone you may know, and I said, oh, I think we could do this cheaper. We may not need to spend the money that we've raised. And he's like, well, then you're making me a fool because I gave you the money because I thought you could spend it to grow the business. And if you don't need it to grow the business, then something's wrong. And I was like, wow, that is a perspective I had never thought about before, right? You've given me the money and therefore I should spend it. And this is the timeline in which you want me to spend it. So you can give me more money so I can spend it so I can grow the business faster, right? And so I think that, and if we're talking about the first year and the third year and the fourth year were very different years in the evolution of this business, it was like, spend that money as quickly as possible, right? The second was have a plan. I walked in the door, I asked the guys, where's the plan? And they said, what do you mean, where's the plan? Their plan was for splitting the money between the 2 founders and one group's going to spend it on this, other group's. I'm like, that's not a plan. And I went to our buddy, Vinny, and I'm like, Vinny, where's the business plan? And he's like, well, we don't think at stages of this business, you always need to have a business plan. I'm like, what are you talking about? And so I wrote a business plan for the business, right? And so we had a plan, and then it was like, how quickly can we spend the money? And then the third best decision I made was I went and hired a CFO, and I got a lot of pushback. Well, companies at this scale don't need a CFO. They don't need this. They don't need that. I'm like, if we don't have control of the numbers and the budgets and the finance, I can't spend the money quickly because I don't know when I'm going to run out of rail, right? So I'm like, I need this hire. Oh, are you really sure you need a full-blown CFO? I'm like, absolutely. And so having strong financial controls and reporting, spending the money as quickly as possible, and have a clear plan. And my favorite comment our CFO made 3 years later was, hey, you know what? That plan we wrote 3 years ago, we're within 2% of all of our targets financially in the plan.
Brilliant.
And so to me, that's like budgets or decisions. If you don't have a good financial, like most businesses are like, oh, we'll bring in a controller or some guy who pays the payroll or whatever. No. You need a strong financial plan as early as possible, and you need a strong financial partner. And turns out a lot of the people who are your CFO in your first year are not very good with the financials. They're very good with the tactics. Finding that balance is the hard part. And sometimes you bring in a CFO who might not be as good on the tactical side, but is really good on the big picture side to help make sure that you're slotting in the right direction. Sure. So I'd say those were the three big things.
Right. That's amazing. Right. And I actually started seeing the value of having a very good CFO only after I started working with a CFO. Right? Till the time, like,
oh yeah, you're a founder, man.
You don't know the kind of partner that you're actually missing in the organization as first-time founders.
My dad and I worked together for 20 years. He was my CFO. He drove me crazy. I had to fire him at the end and give him a new job where I went to my CEO group. I don't know if you remember any CEO group or getting counseling, but I went to my CEO group and my dad's driving me crazy. I just don't think he can scale at this age with where the business is going, but he's been great. And they're like, wait, you get to go to lunch with your dad 2 to 3 times a week. You get to work with your dad and he enables you to do whatever you want. And you're complaining about how he's an albatross around your neck. What a jerk are you? And I was like, yeah, they're like, have you ever wondered what your dad wants to do? What's interesting? I'm like, well, he does have a master's in quant from MIT and he did start this and he knows analytics. I go, maybe what I should do is put him in a job where he gets to do the type of work he wants to do. And I'll just find someone to do that CFO role. And I did that. And he had the best year or two of his life. We ended up selling the company for a lot more than he ever thought we were going to sell the company for. And it wasn't because he couldn't do that job. It was, he wasn't right for that job at this time in his life. And I got to get him to do something that was more fun. Right.
I think two times in this particular conversation, we have talked about talent, the right job for the right talent and right company. And I think Gallup, in one of their books, I think, I forgot the title of the book. They talk about, and Freshworks founder and CEO also mentioned this several times, there's nothing called as bad talent. It's just bad fit most of the times.
No one wakes up in the morning and says, how can I be an F up? Yeah. No one is like, oh, I think I want to wake up to do, what I find is people who are usually unhappy are unhappy in multiple portions of their life. They are not productive because they don't understand what they're being asked to do, or they don't understand what's being expected of them, or they're not signed up for it. And that's where you get the misfits, right? And it's really hard when you're running the top of the company to understand where those things are. So you have to be listening for talent signals constantly and try and see where you have breakage. It could be a bad manager. It could be, an individual who doesn't get around with manager. It could be a lack of fit with the mission and purpose. And anytime I hear about someone who's like, I don't see where my opportunity in this business is, I'm like, we got to let them go because they're just not, they've moved on mentally from where our mission is.
Amazing point. Thank you. One last question.
Sure.
Again, I want to set your quote as a context before I ask the question. The quote is, I run into a lot of people in their 30s who have actually never done this before. They've never been through a down cycle as a business leader. They are really operating on a clock speed that I think is a little too slow, right? With how exacting and how demanding the last couple of years have been for most scale-ups, right? How would you advise us to think about as we approach 2025?
Well, so everyone who has not lived through a cycle has now lived through at least 2/3 or half of the existing cycle. I'm hoping it's more like 5/8 or 7/8 of the existing cycle, right. But they're through their first cycle, right? They've seen the layoffs. They've seen that you can do a bit of work with half as many people, that you can be just as productive. They've seen that you can make the cuts. They've seen how painful it is to downsize. They've seen people's lives impacted. They've seen the carnage, right? So they're going to be really good the next time it comes around in 5 years or 6 years or whatever the cycle is going to be, right? Probably 8 is my guess. And they better not forget it. And the type of things to do right now are to be like, what are my learnings from this time around? I would say right now, telling people the things they should look for when we're already halfway in the cycle, if I was listening to that, I'd be like, I don't want to hear that from that guy. It's okay. What am I going to do next time? Or how do I learn from this? Because the people, what we may be at this stage is there's still a number of companies that are about to get squashed because they're coming to the realization that they have no way out of their situation, right? But I think optionality, I think we heard that when we were in Park City, optionality is a really important thing. Okay. Having a ton of optionality, also realizing that as the cycle changes, the investors who wanted to give you as much money as possible are now spread out across multiple investments, and they don't want to put more money in things at this time. They want to see the things that are going to work, and they want to figure out how to not put in money into things that aren't going to work. And a lot of people in the room with us are not going to be in the room in 12 months, right? Yep. I don't know if I told you this story or if this is in the quote, but I mean, I was literally at lunch and someone saw that I was wearing an Insight hat and they came up and they're like, oh, we're in the Insight portfolio also. And I'm like, oh, great. And they kind of told me what stage they were at, and they were kind of much more than we were. And I said, so when are you downsizing? And they're like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, the change is coming. It's come, and get your hat on. And they're like, well, I think I'm going to do that in like 4 or 5 months. I'm like, in 4 or 5 months, it's already going to be over. Like, you need to be planning for today so you have maximum optionality. I was like, what's your cash position? Like, this is just someone who's walking by at lunch who just happened to call me out. So I'm like, okay. I was like, you go to the office, like when you're done with this conversation, you go back and write your plan for the next 6 months. And I go, what I strongly suggest you do is get some envelopes and write in the envelope a card that says, if this is the circumstance on this date, these are decisions that I am automatically making, right? Because a lot of times as leaders, we cannot make decisions in the moment because we have emotion, we have commitment, we have loyalty, we have all these things. So what we have to do is say, here's some clear OKRs. If on this date, these events haven't occurred, I have to make these decisions. If these things haven't occurred, these are the things I can continue doing. But you have to force yourself because you're only accountable to the board. And if you get to the level of the board where you have to be accountable, you're already dead, right? Your board has to trust that you have the judgment to make the decisions that they would like to make or they would like to not make because they paid you to make those decisions, and that they trust that you're not going to go make some dumbass decisions. Pardon my French if that has to get audited out. That you're not going to make some dumb decisions, right? You've got to manage their trust. You have to create systems internally to hold yourself accountable. When you live through a couple of cycles, you know that the cycle, when you want the cycle to be over, is not when it's ending. So how do you plan for 6, 9, 12 months beyond that cycle?
Plus all the people who are part of the journey as well to be able to build the company in the future.
Yeah. But if you take those lessons and you come up with a couple of tricks to keep yourself accountable, that's where you have the skills of the learning of those past things. And by the way, every cycle is different. There's new surprises everywhere. But what doesn't change is your job is to make decisions and to keep the tribe safe, right? And sometimes keeping the tribe safe is you have to make decisions
that are unpopular.
Yeah, very unpopular. And you have to go back to the same way you were when things were going great and say, got no fear. Fear is the enemy. I cannot afford to have fear because I'm responsible for my investors. I'm responsible for my employees. I'm responsible for my customers. I have all these stakeholders I'm responsible for, and I have to do what's in the interest of the most. I know you lived this.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Ted. I think we are up on time.
Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. This was amazing conversation. Really loved it. Feels like we could keep talking and I could keep asking questions about so many other areas. It was just brilliant. Thank you.